welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and we got a new set out, sort of, March of the Machine, the Aftermath. It was sort of an add-on, I think, to, of course, March of the Machine. It's only 50 cards. They dropped the whole entire set all at once. Not exactly sure what the explanation is for why they did it this way, or why this set is so small. Only 50 cards? I don't think I've ever seen a set that small before. But we did get some really great cards for the Commander format, so I am doing a top 10 list. And let's start out with an honorable mention, which is Training Grounds. 1 blue mana enchantment. Activated abilities of creatures you control cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. So I know a lot of people will be saying, hey Demo, this card's not new. It's been printed before. Yes, I know. Giving this an honorable mention because they finally reprinted it. This card was originally from Rise of the Eldrazi. They reprinted it sort of in the list and judge gift cards and stuff like that, but they've never actually reprinted it in a set, and it is a really, really important card in the Commander format. Obviously, if you're in any deck that has activated abilities that you want to reduce, particularly of your Commander, and you're playing blue, this card is just a slam dunk, so I'm really, really happy to see that this card has gotten a reprint. And it actually looks like it got a bunch of printings in this set, so that's great. It's going to bring the cost down for sure. Thought I would give it an honorable mention. All right, coming in at number 10 is Draznith Ruins. It's a land, taps to add a colorless, pay 2 and tap, put 2+1/+1 counters on target non-human creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So this is not a fantastic land, however, it is a colorless land, and I usually like to give lands like this a mention on these lists because, of course, they can go in any deck. A colorless land can very easily slot into any Commander deck just by replacing a land you already have if the ability that you're getting off of it is going to benefit you. And being able to put 2+1/+1 counters on target non-human creature that entered the battlefield this turn is very usable in a whole lot of decks. In particular, if you have a Commander that is not a human. Any deck that has a Commander that isn't human and maybe isn't 5 colors could play this land. I'm not saying you should run out and grab it and throw it on all your decks. It is a possibility that this will fit in your deck, and in particular, if you're in a deck that's dealing with +1/+1 counters, or you, for some particular reason, really want those +1/+1 counters on your Commander, and your Commander's not human, this could be a really good fit. All right, coming in at number 9, Nahiri's Resolve. 3 red and a white enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and have haste. At the beginning of your end step, exile any number of non-token artifacts and or creatures you control. Return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next upkeep. This is a really great card and a really interesting one. Unlike Draznith Ruins, is not one of those cards that you could just slot into any deck. I think you do want to use it in particular strategies, but man, it's just such a unique, interesting card that can be really good in certain decks that I had to give it a mention. So first of all, 5-mana enchantment, creatures you control get +1/+0 and have haste. That's really good. Obviously, a lot of decks want to be giving their creatures that bump. They want to be giving their creatures haste. Pretty much every deck, I suppose, wants to be giving their creatures haste. So that's always going to be good, but that last ability is the really interesting part, right? At the beginning of your end step, you're going to exile any number of non-token artifacts and or creatures you control, and they will not be returned until your following upkeep. Now, first of all, that's great in a blink strategy. If you happen to be in a Boros blink strategy, you can exile a couple of creatures. They'll come back on your upkeep. You will get the ETB if they have one. Obviously, because this is giving your creatures haste, they're going to enter the battlefield on your upkeep, and you can attack with them right away or use their abilities right away. So there's no downside there. The really interesting part, and the most useful one, I think, is that you can get your creatures off the table to protect them. I can exile my Commander or maybe some of my other creatures that I don't want to worry about losing to a board wipe, right? This is a great way to protect your stuff. Now, if you're going to exile all your creatures so that you don't lose them to a board wipe, you're probably going to be susceptible to being attacked yourself. So you do have to be careful there, but this is exile any number of artifact and or creatures. Of course, you can protect your artifacts from those artifact board wipes as well. Vandal Blast and Bane of Progress. Really, really interesting card. I'm not not sure how much play this is going to see, but I like the uniqueness of it. I had to give it a mention. Speaking of uniqueness, rebuild the city. 3 black, red, and a green sorcery. Choose target land. Create 3 tokens that are copies of it, except they're 3/3 creatures in addition to their other types, and they have vigilance and menace. Very interesting, unique card. And this is, again, is another one that I'm curious how much play it's going to see. Obviously, it's a 3-color card. That's going to limit how much play it sees. I think probably it could go in any Jund deck, and it's going to be great. It is 6 mana. That's a lot. This is a pretty good ramp spell, though, right? Let's say you choose a basic forest. You're going to create 3 token copies of it. So that means you are ramping times 3, right? You are getting 3 extra lands into play. So a 6 mana spell that nets you 3 extra lands is pretty good. They are also untapped. However, they are affected by summoning sickness, right? Because they are creatures. So you cannot tap their mana abilities right away unless you do have a haste enabler. Of course, you're also putting a lot of power on the board, right? You're creating 3/3/3 creatures. That's 9 power with vigilance and menace. And of course, the vigilance part is extra good because you can attack with them, and then on your second main phase, they're not tapped, so you can tap them for mana. And of course, you can copy some more interesting lands with this as well, right? This is a land copy effect, which we really haven't seen much at all. Certainly not in these colors, right? So I can copy my Maze of Ith if I want to. Now I have 4 Maze of Iths in play. I can attack with them. They have vigilance, so I can leave them up and use them on my opponent's turn to untap my opponent's attacking creatures. Really interesting card that you could probably do a lot of neat things with it. I had to give it a mention on this list. Coming in at number 7, Telurian Contempt. 3 blue enchantment. When Telurian Contempt enters the battlefield, put a rejection counter on each creature your opponents control. At the beginning of your end step, for each opponent, choose up to 1 target creature they control with a rejection counter on it. That creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library. So this is a very interesting sort of pseudo mono blue board wipe in a way. It's a little confusing, the wording, so let's run through it. It's going to enter the battlefield. You're going to put a rejection counter on each creature your opponents control, right? So if they each have 4 creatures in play, they each get a rejection counter on it. And then for each opponent, you get to choose one of those creatures that has a rejection counter on it, and they're going to choose whether or not they want to put it on the top or bottom of their library. I would imagine they're probably going to choose top because, of course, then they're going to just draw it on their turn. If you choose their commander, they're likely going to choose top so that they can get it back right away. It seems unlikely that they're ever going to choose bottom. So really more than a board wipe, I guess this is sort of a bounce scenario because what's going to happen most of the time is on your end step, you're going to choose a creature for each player and they're going to put it on top of their library and draw it again. However, keep in mind, if they keep putting those creatures on top of their library, that's what they're going to be drawing every turn, right? This is at the beginning of your end step, which means at the beginning of all your end steps. This is an enchantment. It's sticking on the battlefield. So on your next end step, you're going to choose another creature with a rejection counter on it. And if they want to put that on top of their library, then that's the card they're going to be drawing every turn, right? So if they keep putting those creatures on top of their library, that's all they're going to be drawing. They're not going to be getting any fresh cards in their hand. So for like 4 turns, you can be really slowing your opponents down where you're putting their cards on top of their library, getting their creatures off the table, stifling their draws, right? This can be a really great effect for slowing your opponents down. And I really like cards like that in certain strategies. It's a really interesting card. Coming in at number 6, Erbork Scavengers. 2 and a black, Spirit 2/2. When Erbork Scavengers enters the battlefield or attacks, exile target card from a graveyard. Put a +1/+1 counter on Erbork Scavengers. Erbork Scavengers has flying. As long as a card exiled with it has flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. So when you look at this card, you think, okay, well, that specifically goes in those decks that you want to be doing the evergreen ability sort of stuff, right? And there are a few decks like that where it will specifically fit, and it could fit great in there, sure. But I think this is a card that you could put in any deck, not because of the second ability, because of the first ability. This is a fantastic graveyard hate card, right? And like I say all the time, you absolutely need graveyard hate in your commander decks. So 3 mana, this comes down. When it enters the battle, battlefield, you're going to exile a card from a graveyard. Doesn't have to be a creature card. It can be any card. So if there is a card in an opponent's graveyard that you really want to get rid of, you can. Then you're going to put a +1/+1 counter on your Erbork Scavenger, so it's already a 3/3. The added bonus is if I am now exiling creatures from my opponent's graveyards, this guy gets bigger. So the way I'm going to play this card is it's going to come down, it enters the battlefield, I exile the card that I really want to get rid of, and then this becomes a 3/3. Now the next turn I attack with my Erbork Scavengers, and I'm going to exile a creature with flying in someone's graveyard. Now I have a flyer on the table that whenever it attacks, I get to exile a card from a graveyard, and then also I probably will likely be gaining abilities as I go. It doesn't specifically fit in a whole lot of decks. I guess a +1/+1 counter deck if you're in black. I suppose I could put this in my A Name Is One deck because it is a spirit, and I'm always looking for those black-green spirits to put in that deck. Other than that, though, it's just a really great card in a commander game as a graveyard hate option. Coming in at number 5, Cosmic Rebirth. 1 green and a white. Instant. Choose target permanent card in your graveyard. If it has mana value 3 or less, you may put it onto the battlefield. If you don't put it onto the battlefield, put it into your hand, you gain 3 life. This card seems pretty fantastic, and when I first saw it, I was like, okay, that seems like it's better than most of the other options we already have in the format for doing this similar thing. I probably would have put this higher on the list if it wasn't 2 colors. Typically, I like to put cards higher on the list that are 1 color or even colorless because they can be put in more decks. Because this is a 2-color card, it's not going to fit in as many decks. Still fit in a lot of decks though, and I just think it's a fantastic option. You could put this in any commander deck and it's going to be great for you. It's gaining 3 life. That's pretty good. I suppose if you're in that Selesnya life gain theme, this is an auto include, but just what it's doing other than that is a card that can be really, really useful in a commander game. You're just going to choose a permanent card in your graveyard that you want to get back. If it happens to be mana value 3 or less, it goes right to the battlefield. Otherwise, it goes back to your hand. You want that Smothering Tithe? Well, that's more than mana value 3, so it just goes back to your hand, and then you can play it again. If it's to say your commander, which costs mana value 3 or less, which of course is a whole lot of commanders that cost 3 or less, it's going to go straight to the battlefield, and that's where this is really good. If I'm in a deck that is white and green and has a commander that's mana value 3 or less, I'm absolutely going to be slotting this in. It's instant speed, remember, right? I can instant speed, get my commander out of the graveyard and put it directly onto the battlefield, and I'll gain 3 life on top of it. I think this card's a fantastic one in the format. Coming in at number 4, Tranquil Thrillback, 2 and a green, dinosaur, 3/3. When Tranquil Thrillback enters the battlefield, you may pay a green up to 3 times. When you pay this cost 1 or more times, choose up to that many. You can either destroy an artifact or enchantment, exile target player's graveyard, or gain 4 life. I love this creature. You know, a lot of people are probably not surprised I'm talking about this card because I love creatures with abilities stapled on them. I always do, and I always love modal cards as well. So a creature with a modal ability stapled on it that I can reuse over and over again is obviously a great card in the commander format. I will just point out, you know, the wording here is a little weird, right? This enters the battlefield and then you pay green, and a lot of people will go, okay, well, how come they just didn't do kicker? Isn't this just kicker? Kicker is a cast, whereas this is an enter the battlefield, so you can reuse it, right? If I blink a creature with kicker, I'm not going to be able to reuse the kicker. This I can. I can blink this guy or recur him from my graveyard, and when he enters the battlefield, this will trigger, and I can pay the green up to 3 times and do all these things. Really, really fantastic utility creature in the format. I'm going to try to find room for this one in one of my decks. Coming in at number 3, a really interesting card, Reckless Handling. 1 and a red sorcery. Search your library for an artifact card. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Discard a card at random. Okay, all of a sudden this card got a lot worse. It was sounding really good until you got to that part, right? If an artifact card was discarded this way, Reckless Handling deals 2 damage to each opponent. I was not sure where to put this on the list. It certainly is going to see play in the format, no doubt. It will get comparisons to Gamble, which of course is a really popular card in the format, gets played a lot, is I guess the best red tutor because red doesn't really have tutors. This is probably going to be the second best red tutor, I think. It only gets artifacts, okay, sure. But But there are a lot of artifacts that you want to be getting out of your deck, especially a lot of red decks, right? There's a lot of red decks out there that want to be getting artifacts that are playing an artifact theme. And also there's a lot of red decks out there that if that artifact ends up getting discarded into your graveyard, you don't really mind, right? That's where a card like Gamble gets extra good, is you go get that card and you discard it. You don't really care if it goes in the graveyard. The same is true here. I myself have a deck that is an artifact recursion sort of theme. So if I go get a certain artifact and I happen to discard it at random and it goes into my graveyard, oh well, I can get it back. I'm okay with that, right? This can be, I go search my library for an artifact card and put it in my graveyard. And then on the added bonus, if you happen to discard that card that you kind of wanted, you get to deal 2 damage to each opponent. This is a red tutor that's going to get artifacts. That on itself is really, really significant. So of course this card has to get a mention on this list. How popular will this card be? I'm not exactly sure. I guess we will find out. Coming in at number 2 is Filter Out. 1 blue instant. Return all non-creature, non-land permanents to their owner's hand. Oh, that sounds really intense when you first read it. When I first read that, I was like, what? I gotta read that card again. It sounds really, really good for 3 mana instant. And it is. This is a pretty good card. That's why I got it so high on my list. However, it's not returning obviously lands and it's not returning creatures, which is typically the number one thing you want to be hitting when you're doing these sort of bounce effects. However, I still think this is really, really good. Obviously, it's going to hit all the non-creature, non-land cards, and it's going to be doing it at instant speed for only 3 mana. That's really, really good. It's going to hit those planeswalkers if that's something you want to be dealing with, but mostly it's going to be hitting the artifacts and the enchantments. And I think 3 mana instant speed, I bounce all the artifacts and enchantments to hand, is pretty darn good, especially if you're in a spell slinger or control theme, because you probably don't have a whole lot of those, right? It's not really going to be hurting you that much. And if you're playing against that artifact tribal or that enchantment tribal deck, you're really going to be hitting them hard. And in particular, if there's tokens in play, right? This is a great card, another really great card against those treasure token themes or any artifact token theme, because of course the tokens don't come back. If my opponent has 12 artifact tokens in play and I bounce them, they're all going to disappear and I'll never have to deal with them again. So that's where this card gets extra good. Again, this is another card that I'm looking at and I'm going, how much play is this actually going to see in the format? I think it's pretty good, but we are reaching the point of saturation in this format, right? Like I've been talking about a lot recently, where it's becoming really difficult to shoehorn cards like this into your decks, even though it can be really, really good in a commander game. So outside of that spell slinger control theme, how much play is this going to see, right? I don't know if I could find room for this in even my mono blue decks, right? That's how far we've gotten with the saturation in this format. It's becoming really, really hard to find room for cards in decks. So a card like this that isn't doing anything really specific, even though I think it is pretty good, not sure how much play this is going to see. All right, and coming in at number 1 for me is Open the Way. I'm not sure how much buzz this card is getting, but I read it over a couple times and I'm like, I think this is a pretty good ramp option in the format. X green sorcery. X can't be greater than the number of players in the game. So likely in a commander game, you're going to have 4 players, so X can't be greater than 4. So going forward, talking about this card, we're going to imagine we're in a 4-player commander game here, right? Because that's usually going to be the case. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X land cards. Put those land cards onto the battlefield tapped and the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. This reads pretty good when you first read it, and when you start going through the scenarios, it still seems really good. So if I pay 2 into this, I'm paying 4 mana to get 2 lands. Everyone plays Sky Shroud Claim. I know I do. And a lot of people still play Explosive Vegetation. Those are 4 mana sorceries that are going to get you 2 lands. Now, the downside, if I'm comparing this to an Explosive Vegetation, for example, the downside here is Explosive Vegetation will mana fix me, where Open the Way may or may not, right? I'm getting random lands off the top. If I need specific colors in my deck, Explosive Vegetation will go get me those 2 basic lands that I need to mana fix me, whereas Open the Way is going to get me random lands off the top. I might get colorless lands, who knows? However, I can get any kind of land. I might be getting Triomes off the top of my library. I might be getting a Gaia's Cradle off the top of my library, right? That's sort of the dream scenario here, is I might be getting some super good bombs off the top of my library. I know a lot of people will say, oh, well, in a 5-color deck, this doesn't seem very good because you want to be mana fixing, you want to be getting certain lands. Well, maybe, but also in a 5-color deck, probably you have a lot of those triomes. You have a lot of lands that are producing lots of different colors of mana. So chances are, if I cast this for 4 and get 2 lands off the top, probably going to get 2 triomes, and I'm probably going to be mana fixed in all the colors I need already. And then, of course, the bigger upside here is I can go even higher now. I can pay 5 into this or even 6 into this. And I'm guaranteed to get lands here, right? This is 6 mana. I'm getting 4 lands into play. They're going to be tapped, but they can be any land in my deck, which could be really, really good. So how good is this? You know, it's tough to evaluate. This seems like one of those cards that a lot of people are going to be playing, and maybe they're going to find out it's not great. Like if I put 1 into this is 3 mana, get 1 land off the top into play. That doesn't seem very good. 6 mana, get 4 lands into play seems pretty good. That's kind of why I like it. I like it because I can put 3 mana into this and it's just okay if I really need lands early in the game. But then later in the game, when I draw this off the top, I can put 6 mana into it and put a whole bunch of lands into play. I also kind of like the fun aspect of I'm revealing cards off the top of my library. I'm guaranteed to get as many lands as I'm putting into this, but what am I going to get, right? It's kind of a nice surprise. That sort of plays into it as well. Really interesting card. I think for sure it is going to see a lot of play in the format, and I think it might be the best card for the Commander format from this set. Let me know what you guys think, and let me know what you think of all these cards. Which ones are you going to be putting in your Commander decks, and which cards did maybe I missed that you really, really like that you're going to be slotting into your decks that I didn't talk about here? Let me know in the comments below, but that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.